Welcome to the ROTC Scholarship Podcast, hosted by former Army ROTC Professor of Military Science, Lieutenant Colonel Retired Rob Kirkland. In these episodes, we explore how to best prepare yourself to obtain one of these valuable scholarships for those applicants who wish to attend a college or university and become officers in the military. The application process can be complex and confusing. This podcast works to make it more understandable. And now, the ROTC Scholarship Podcast. Hi, everyone. This is Lieutenant Colonel Kirkland. The following podcast is the second half of the episode we did on our sister podcast, Gain Service Academy Admission. In the first half of the episode, we talked about the guest experience in high school, college, the Air Force Academy Prep School, and the Air Force Academy. As the podcast commences here, we start discussing U.S. Space Force. Please visit the Gain Service Academy Admission podcast if you'd like to hear the whole episode. Without further ado, the show.
Let's talk about your career in the Space Force.
Yeah, I think maybe some people listening to this are like, what? Did they just say Space Force? But yes, it's a thing.
Can you tell us a little about what the Space Force is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Space Force stood up, I think the birthday is December 20th, 2019. So it's very, very new. Something that was in the NDAA for that year was the birth of Space Force. And so if you're familiar with kind of the structure of the Air Force and some of the MAGCOMs that were in there, what they thought, with former President Donald Trump, kind of saying, hey, there is a need for a Space Force. I think, where things are headed in the future, it would be prudent for us to have this own separate military branch. And one of the MAGCOMs in the Air Force was Air Force Space Command. So they just kind of took all the mission that was happening there and stood up, its own kind of military branch. So there was a lot of space bases in the Air Force. You had Vandenberg Air Force Base, Buckley, Peterson.
Vandenberg's in California, right? Buckley and Peterson are in Colorado.
That's correct. Yeah. And I was actually at Vandenberg for my first assignment. And then there's Patrick out in Florida, but you also have like Thule, which is in Greenland, and some other locations that now the Space Force has. And I think here pretty recently, you had like Peterson Air Force Base switch to Peterson Space Force Base, and same thing with Buckley and Vandenberg and Patrick there. But it's a super interesting thing. And I think a lot of people were like, hey, this kind of came out of nowhere. Why are we kind of doing this? But I got the opportunity to tour the Pentagon a couple months ago in my position. And we got to see, the Space Force, Heritage Hall, and a lot of the cool things, and some of the different makers in that realm. But, they were actually contemplating standing up a Space Force back before 9/11. And, once that kind of went down, I think it made people kind of shift their attention and their focus on some other things, rightfully so. But that was something that was being communicated and looked at even that long ago. So kind of an interesting thing.
So does that mean that I remember the domains of the Air Force are airspace and cyberspace, or used to be space. So now Air Force, is it just air and cyberspace, and Space Force has taken on space completely?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think they're still writing, or maybe they just published something just recently, but I think the Air Force is still the same. And I'm not sure if that's because, similar to what you see with the Marine Corps and the Navy, where the Space Force is in the Department of the Air Force. But, you have the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, who kind of is the highest ranking individual for the Air Force. But then you have the Chief of Space Operations, who's a 4-star as well, who's kind of been elevated into the same position, serving under the Secretary of the Air Force.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That's a good way to, I think about it, maybe as the Marine Corps Commandant, as part of the Navy, but yet it's a separate service. But but maybe the Navy takes on a lot of the logistics and administrative overhead for the Marine Corps.
Right.
Something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And when the Space Force stood up, they kept it in their minds that, hey, we want to keep this a pretty small force, and you will have aspects of the Air Force still supporting the Space Force. They transferred over a small amount of AFSCs, Air Force Specialty Codes, kind of your career number, what job you have into the Space Force. And so the ones that they transferred over, they had like their organic ones that were, this is kind of obvious to transfer over with, you have space operations. So yeah, let's go ahead and transfer them over automatically. But you had others that were optional, common AFSCs, and that was like intelligence, cyber engineers, and acquisitions, where they can support both, but there's also a very unique niche with the space realm and space domain where cyber intel and acquisitions, all that, it would make sense to make a separate one. So those were some of the others that had the option to transfer into the Space Force. But if you have like security forces, contracting, or some of the other AFSCs, those don't exist within the Space Force and are supported from the Air Force.
So Sam, as a Space Force officer, how long now have you been a first lieutenant?
Yeah, so I started out when I graduated the academy. I commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Air Force, and so I was a second lieutenant for 2 years while I was out at Vandenberg in a contracting squadron, serving, and a 64P is what they call it. It's an OPEX. I could probably talk about that later. So I was still in the Air Force as a second lieutenant, and then was in the Air Force as a first lieutenant for, I believe, I think 9 months, and then transferred into the Space Force. So then back in February was when I was officially transferred over into the Space Force, and I'm still a first lieutenant. So I've been a first lieutenant for a little over a year, maybe closer to a year and a half.
So you've been in the Space Force now for about 8 months.
That's correct. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's great. That's great. And it seems like a lot of people, like there's a bunch of different ways to get into the Space Force. And what you did, it seems like it's about a third of what's going on in terms of they're taking about 100 current Air Force officers a year and transferring them into the Space Force. This year, or excuse me, last year, the Air Force Academy graduated 118 officers into the Space Force, and ROTC graduated about 60 officers. So, about a little over 100 are transitioning from the Air Force, but brand new second lieutenants every year, it's about 200.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, when I transferred, it was, hey, we're going to figure out how to transfer, because I was an acquisitions guy. I just did contracting as an operational experience, but my main job was acquisition. So when they kind of let it out saying, hey, Space Force is going to be a thing, we're going to transfer some acquisition folks in, let's sign up here if you want to even do that. So I was kind of part of the first wave of taking all the Air Force individuals and then transferring those into the Space Force, at least in the acquisition career field. And then that just kind of finally went through back in February for at least CGOs, your company grade officers.
Okay. Yeah.
Interesting. No, I was going to say that, sorry to interrupt there, Trish. I was just going to ask about, what do you see the junior role in Space Force being, junior officer role being in Space Force with the different, AFSCs?
Yeah, so I think it's different across the board. If you kind of look at space operations, or the ones that are on the ops floors working on the mission, as a young officer, you're probably leading a flight of other individuals, just kind of seeing, depending on your mission, that it, whether you're working shifts or whatever, that the mission gets done. And then some of the other common AFSCs that are supporting, whether that's Intel Cyber, being an engineer or acquisitions, you're finding new innovative ways to push the mission forward and support the operators. So as a just a first lieutenant, it might seem like, hey, I don't have a lot of impact when it comes to acquisitions, but the Space Force, I think, is kind of setting itself up in a manner where you don't have to be a colonel or a 3-star or anything like that to make a lot of impact. As a young officer, you're encouraged to kind of shake things up a little bit, and maybe take some risks and help the decision makers see and understand that kind of risk, at least in the acquisition realm. I'm finding new ways to try to speed up and kind of break down some bureaucratic walls that the DoD has put in place when it comes to acquisitions. And that's probably a whole nother podcast and issue is the acquisitions within the Department of Defense. But as a young lieutenant, it's just fun to try to go and find different innovative ways to make things move faster.
And Sam, what kind of budget are you responsible for?
So my case is a little different. So I'm part of an organization called Space Camp, and so that's it's not the kids camp that you go to when you're younger to learn about space and astronauts and stuff like that. Although I do wish that I did go there. Unfortunately, I did not. Yeah, exactly. But it stands for Commercially Augmented Mission Platform, and so we develop software for the space operators and people within the Space Force, really taking industry practices and finding out how to do that in the DoD, because in the past, software, the DoD didn't do software very well. You spend many months and years trying to develop something and you deliver it and it doesn't work. But here at Space Camp, we take into what makes your Facebooks and your Googles and your Netflix is so successful with software development and bring it into Space Camp. So it kind of started a little underground, and then people saw the value of it and are wanting to invest in it. And so we're not necessarily a program of record where we have this big pot of money where we kind of have to allocate resources and send investments here and there, but we do a lot of customer funding. So we work with other organizations within the Space Force, and they'll kind of send us money, for lack of a better term. And I don't want to get too much into the weeds on acquisitions and MIPRs and all that fun stuff, but they just partner with us and they want us to build out a capability for them. So I know that was a long way to answer a small question, but
no, I mean,
last year we probably did, speaking in commercial terms, probably around $33 million of business.
And is that for your organization, or how much of a piece of that are you responsible for throughout the year?
Yeah, so that's for the whole organization, but I myself and some of the work that I do in an acquisition role, I kind of oversee all of that.
That's a huge responsibility for a company grade officer.
Yeah, it's interesting, and then even in like the contracting realm, when I was in a contracting squadron, I was able to get my warrant, which essentially allows you to spend the government's money. It's taxpayer dollars, but you see company grade officers in the Air Force in charge of signing and entering into contracts with individuals for $5 million up to an unlimited amount. If they're going on deployments too, they have that kind of that authority. And if you're managing contracts, I think I was managing a total contract portfolio of around $102 million.
Yeah.
So a lot of responsibility, but it's fun.
And what do you think the most important trait in terms of like an intrinsic military trait is in that type of position? like something from, the honor code type trait?
Yeah. So there's some horror stories out there when it comes to, if you're working with a large amount of money and you're working with contractors, sometimes there can be things that happen behind doors and looking for deals to be made. But, just kind of having that integrity, I'd say is a huge trait and something that, you kind of pick up a lot at an academy is, just doing the right thing, even when no one's watching. So that certainly helps in that realm when you have to bring some integrity into business transactions or contracts and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, most definitely. I guess kind of looking at acquisitions as a whole, stepping back, why did you choose acquisitions from the academy, and what other options were available, and how competitive was acquisitions?
So when I was kind of going through and trying to figure out what I wanted to do in the Air Force, I didn't really want to go the pilot route or anything like that. But being in business management, one of the things that I could see translate, as best as possible was acquisitions, managing programs, and whether that's handling a budget or trying to make timelines or managing that type of stuff. Acquisitions fit most, I guess, snugly, if that's a word. I'm not sure it is, but I did say my reading and writing wasn't the best score on my ACTs. But
we'll catch a break.
I appreciate that. So yeah, they also had that opportunity for an OPEX, where you go and do a different AFSC for the first 3 years to kind of gain some different experience in what other career fields are doing. And contracting was another one of those things where it's like, hey, I might be able to apply a lot of these different business principles to my job, and I get to work with people and manage programs and budgets and all that stuff. So that's what I saw was most applicable there, and it sounded the coolest to me. Certainly, I'm not flying Mach 1.2 or whatever, but I am able to kind of see how dollars are flowing through the mission. And so I think in my grade, when we graduated, I want to say maybe there was like 60 slots spread across contracting and acquisitions. And I think the year after me, I think they took it off like that. I don't think there was any opportunities for acquisitions or contracting. So it's one of those things where it might change here and there, but I think they've probably come to a better cadence on how many are open. But it's nothing close to there's 600 or 700 pilot slots. Maybe that's a really high number, but maybe it's more like 300 or 350. Yeah. There's a small number for acquisitions and contracting, but you honestly don't learn a whole lot about it, when you're at the academy. I'll full transparency. When I got contracting, I was like, okay, I know it's working with money and projects and stuff, but what is it? Like, what is contracting? I hear contracting officer, but I don't know what that means. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's I think one of the great opportunities that is available to cadets at the service academies is to go on those summer exposure programs, go overseas to bases or stateside to bases and get exposure to different Air Force specialty codes. But unfortunately, I don't think contracting is a very common one that people get to see beforehand.
Yeah, I do remember shadowing one. I went to Travis on mine, and I shadowed the contracting office for, I think, maybe an hour or two, and I still walked away. And I was like, I don't know. Maybe that was because I couldn't really wrap my head around it. I was stuck in California, so maybe I wasn't really paying attention. But yeah, paperwork. That's all I heard.
Well, it's really interesting how it's grown over the last few years, because the year when Space Force stood up, I think 30 cadets from the Air Force Academy commissioned directly into the Space Force. Last year in 2020, 86 cadets, and then 2021, 118. So it's definitely growing. There's an opportunity. Yeah. And my understanding is it is still very competitive, even with 118 slots. But since they've opened up more career fields, space operations, intel, cyber, and acquisitions, there's just more opportunity now for people within Space Force. Colonel Kirkland, I know you have some insight on the ROTC side of the house.
Yeah, I talked to a professor of aerospace science regarding what the current accessions are going on with the ROTC, Air Force ROTC into the Space Force, and his answer, Sam, was, and I'll just read it, is that it's very competitive. First, there's a 13S Space Operations Officer Board where the cadets compete for the Air Force Specialty Code 13S. And then Air Force ROTC runs a full rated board, including those who competed in the 13S board. For those selected for both, the cadet will be given a position for which they're more qualified, meaning the higher order of merit they receive. So they say USSF takes precedence if they compete for that service. So there are about 60 slots per year, with 24 coming from tech degrees and 36 coming from non-tech. However, if they have a critical major such as electrical engineering or meteorology, they're ineligible for the 13S board. As far as GPA, the minimums are greater than 2 or equal to 2.0, but in reality, they are looking at much higher, as in the mid to high threes. They need to take the AFOQT like everyone else. No tests are required, similar to pilots. So that's that's his overview of the ROTC route. And just from my standpoint, looking at it, looks to be that's the much harder route to Space Force is through ROTC than the Air Force Academy.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Those are some crazy numbers.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like if it's only 60, and I know that Air Force ROTC total numbers is each year I think is probably double or maybe even triple the numbers of the Air Force Academy. You're looking at a much greater difficulty of getting into Space Force from ROTC, but it still is doable, and it looks like that they're taking non-tech, more non-tech than tech. So interesting information. And don't major in electrical engineering or meteorology. You're not going to get into Space Force from ROTC.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and I know, and sure, it's very competitive, but I think the Space Force is capped out at only, I want to say 16,000 people. I could be wrong there. I might have to fact check me, but yeah, I think they're intentionally trying to stay a very small service. So I'm sure that certainly contributes to the competitiveness to try to get in.
Yeah. Wow. 16,000. That's just a fraction of the other services.
Right.
With that being said, what do you think the future of the Space Force is going forward?
I think there's a lot of different things that could happen, and you might see, if you kind of look into the Space Force, there's a lot of talk about being agile, lean, and digital. There's going to be a huge emphasis on being a digital force, even with the way that the world is moving, some of the different directions, and adoption of even industry and becoming more digital there as well, and even just access to space. You're seeing a lot of the industry leaders like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson, and trying to have this assured access to space, and even on the commercial side. So the Space Force has and will continue to have a huge part in that. I'm not sure how much we'll be involved with. I'm sure there will be a lot with Mars exploration, but there's also this fact of space should remain an uncontested environment, but there are some bad actors out there, and we want to make sure that we protect a lot of our assets that are out there, and make sure that whatever's happening in space is, we can make sure we have a good pulse on that. And I would wager to say everything that we do have in space is probably some of the most important things that we have to our infrastructure as a nation. With satellites, think first thing you do when you wake up in the morning, if you get on your phone, you're already tapping into space. You're sending a text message, checking your bank account, trading on the stock market, making a phone call, GPS, making your way to work. Everything touches space, and so that environment, when it comes to crippling economies or waging war is all tied to space. So we want to make sure that we have good control over that and make sure nothing too crazy happens. Now, are we going to get to a point where it's like Star Trek and we have all these battleships in space and stuff like that? I can't say there. I don't know if we will get there anytime soon, but I think just being able to defend that area of our, I guess, the way we work as a nation is crucial.
Yeah, it's really fascinating just how little we all think about how tied our lives are to space and that, our Space Force is defending that and just the uncontested nature of space and how contested it is in reality. Yeah. So very interesting. Colonel Kirkland, do you have any final thoughts for Sam?
Well, I would be amiss to ask what's the role for us Army guys or a Navy person or a Marine in the future of Space Force? Has that been kind of ironed out, or have you been hearing anything about ability for other services maybe to become a part of Space Force?
Yeah, so I think just recently we transferred some, I think everyone from Navy, Marines, Army, maybe Coast Guard as well, into the Space Force. So those individuals are able to transfer. I'm not sure what the numbers look like there, but space is a joint environment. There's a lot of partnerships with the Navy and Army and Marines, whether that's at the U.S. Space Command or everywhere, is everything that does touch space. That includes all of our different military branches as well, and our allied partners, whether that's Canada or New Zealand or all these other different countries. It's there's opportunity to tap into it, whether that's maybe, hey, I'm still wearing the Army uniform, but I go serve in a joint position supporting the Space Force or something like that. I think there's a plethora of opportunity and probably going to be an increased amount of opportunity in the future for that.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I don't have any other questions, Trish.
Great. Well, Lieutenant Creamier, thank you so much for just giving us some insight into what it's like to be a Space Force officer and your time at the Air Force Academy. And we really appreciate everything that you do. And thank you for your service. And thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can't thank you enough for the opportunity to come on the show and kind of talk about my experience with the Academy and then all the fun that I'm having in the Space Force. It's certainly a fun thing to talk about. And if people ever want to reach me, my name is pretty unique, Sam Creamier. So just you could just reach out if you have more questions. But I think this podcast is phenomenal for those individuals looking to join the Service Academy or look into the Space Force. And I really look forward to everything that this conversation will do.
Well, thanks so much, Sam.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the ROTC Scholarship Podcast. If you like what we're doing, please leave a quick review. If you have any questions or want more information about ROTC or our consulting services, please visit our website at rotcconsulting.com. Take care, and we'll see you next time.